Welcome to Counterpoints. We're coming to you in the middle of an absolutely crazy week. How are you doing, Ryan?
Well, we haven't gone over the cliff yet.
Not yet, but it's coming.
The global economy has not been blown up. Vladimir Zelensky and Chairman Xi spoke on the phone yesterday. That could be a step toward a Chinese brokered peace. Even the United States believes that China might be the only one, that has remotely the credibility to broker something. We're all waiting, I guess, for this spring offensive to finish off, which seems kind of morbid. That people seem to know this war has to end at some point, but hold on, we're just going to do a couple more months of carnage and then we'll end it, rather than just saying, how about all of those people can live, have grandchildren, et cetera, and end the war now.
Right. A crazy story that we'll continue to follow because that, to your point, the Chinese intervention here seems to be even people in the United States saying, what's going on?
Yeah. After they struck a Middle East peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, we're going to start today by talking about the debt standoff that's coming to a head maybe today, actually. We're going to talk about some developments in the 2024 presidential race. We're going to talk about the Supreme Court conflicts of interest stories that have come out in the last couple of weeks. We're talking about the Abby Grossberg lawsuit that is coming for Fox News. We're going to talk about Dr. Fauci's recent profile in the New York Times. I'm going to talk about the United Nations, and Ryan is going to talk about Susan Rice. Let's start with the news of the day, the debt standoff. President Biden yesterday said, quote,
A1 here.
Republican efforts, the Republican legislation is a reckless attempt to extract extreme concessions as a condition for the United States simply paying the bills it has already incurred. Now, you have, if we put A2 up on the screen, Chip Roy, he's from the House Freedom Caucus. He just wrote this in the Federalist. He says this is the question that Republicans are presented with. Quote, will we cave to the president, Wall Street, massive corporations, swamp lobbyists, and the corporate media to continue America's borrow and spend death spiral? Or will we instead take this opportunity to stand up for the American people to demand their leaders stop irresponsibly spending money we do not have? So that is a preview of what faces Kevin McCarthy should he back down on the legislation. Republicans have a bill that they want to vote on today. They need 218 votes. Kevin McCarthy can actually not afford to lose more than, 6 members of the Freedom Caucus. And so in order to work its way through the House of Representatives, he needs to please people who have the thoughts that Chip Roy has there. Here are a couple of quotes, though, that members gave yesterday. This is Jody Arrington. He's the leader of the House Budget Committee.
This one.
He said, Speaker McCarthy's been at the table and he has offered to negotiate with the president. Now we're going to put our terms on a piece of paper, get 218 Republicans, and we're going to put the ball in their court. Ralph Norman, he's a member of the Freedom Caucus, says, this is the bare minimum for me and a host of other people. They're going to be, quote, leaning no until they get concessions from McCarthy. So that's a pretty incredible state of affairs and balance for McCarthy to strike today as they want to push this bill over the finish line. Of course, if you've been following this, President Biden said he's not negotiating, period, because he doesn't think the debt ceiling should have to be raised with any conditions.
And complicating matters for Kevin McCarthy is it's not just the Freedom Caucus that he has to deal with. He also has the Nancy Mace types, who don't like the idea of voting for kind of draconian cuts. Particularly, she and other moderate Republicans don't really like voting against some of these kind of green tax credits because that won't necessarily play well in a swing district.
Well, I think she has people who manufacture in South Carolina.
Right. It's becoming a real industry. Like the clean energy industry is becoming an industry, and so it's going to have jobs associated with it. It's going to have economic impact associated with it, and therefore it's going to have political economy power. It's going to have people who are like, not so sure about this. Equally, you have these Midwest, and I'm sure you know much more about this than I do. You've got all these Midwest Republicans who are upset that the Republican bill, in order to save money, is pulling back on ethanol subsidies. And to me, what do the kids call it? Based? Good for Kevin McCarthy.
For taking ethanol subsidies? Oh, yeah.
Ethanol subsidies are the stupidest possible thing on planet. Like what we do.
The pinnacle of crony capitalism.
Yeah, we take public money and we pay people to grow corn, and then we turn that corn into ethanol, and then we force people to put it in gasoline and put it in their cars. Like,
I think we oppose ethanol for different reasons.
What are we doing?
No, I think that's great. I think that's great. And I mean, the Freedom Caucus should be all over that. And this is how the Washington Post describes the Republican bill on the table. They say it would, quote, slash federal spending dramatically and unwind some of Biden's priorities, including student debt cancellation and efforts to address climate change. In exchange, Republicans would agree to increase the debt ceiling, obviously, the statutory cap on how much the U.S. government can borrow to pay its bills. That's from the Post. So as Ryan was saying, it does roll back some of the bills that have already been passed that by President Biden, the Inflation Reduction Act. It looks at to target some of those things. Obviously, this is not a bill that Joe Biden is going to agree to. It is, however, a bill that gets really interesting when you kick it over to the Senate.
Yeah. Right, but they don't expect it. And also, just to be clear, if people expect there to be some climate benefit out of ethanol, there isn't, because it's so resource intensive to grow the corn in the first place to then burn it. But right, so Kevin McCarthy's plan here is, I'm going to show that I have 218 votes on this bill. And he's like, I'm not negotiating this bill at all. Like, this is what we've got. This is what we're taking to Biden. You've got some Republicans who are saying, and Gates has said this, unless you fiddle with the work requirements, like unless you make higher work requirements for federal benefits kick in sooner, then I'm out, which to me is just not credible, because you're threatening to blow up the global economy to move work requirements from 20 hours to 30 hours and to move it back a little bit, to implement it a little bit faster than it's being implemented in a messaging bill that nobody thinks is going to be passed anyway. It'd be like, pass me the pretzels or I'm going to cut your head off. Like,
a fair deal.
Yeah, no, like, this is not a proportionate response here. Like, you really think work requirements should be higher? Go to committee, write a bill, talk to your other members of Congress, and then maybe we'll, reform work requirements. I think it's silly, but okay, let's talk about that. But you're gonna use this leverage that you have to get that?
The problem with it being a messaging bill is that Gates has absolutely no reason to come to the table with McCarthy. And then it's McCarthy's test to see what he can give to Matt Gaetz, to Chip Roy, to anybody who's demanding concessions from McCarthy in order to build their support. This is really what Kevin McCarthy is good at. It's what he prides himself in doing. He always points back to what he did with Jim Jordan and putting him in charge of oversight, that this was sort of, he used the carrot, not the stick, and it worked out really well. So this is like probably the first biggest test, because really nobody has any clear reason to negotiate. Because if anything, if Matt Gaetz won't get concessions on that, he knows, particularly if he doesn't get a concession on that, he can take it to Fox News. He can take it everywhere he wants and say Kevin McCarthy, wants welfare, whatever, and he's standing up to the swamp.
Right, and it hurts McCarthy, and so then Gaetz is in a better position if he's still, in a hostile posture vis-a-vis McCarthy, because if he doesn't get this package through with 218 votes, then McCarthy is badly hobbled with Biden. Now, people might say, well, but if Gaetz is the one that hobbled McCarthy, isn't it Gaetz's fault? No, people don't pay attention like that. They would just see McCarthy as kind of losing in a standoff with Biden, which then brings McCarthy's demise kind of one day closer. Because if he can't get his own caucus to agree on a debt ceiling increase with all of the cuts that he wants, that his caucus wants, then how can he go to the negotiating table and ask for anything from Biden when it's clear that he can't even deliver on this maximalist position?
Right. Yeah, no, that's a hugely important point. And for Republicans, they obviously need to be strategic about this, because if they lose Kevin McCarthy, again, as we learned in January, they really have no plausible backup. It just doesn't exist. And he is the one person, I'm talking purely from a strategic standpoint right now, he's the one person that has any hope of bridging all of these different divides and navigating all of these different competing interests. And so if they push it to the limit on this, especially on the messaging bill, if they push it to the limit on the messaging bill, then they could be in serious trouble for the rest of this Congress. And I would just add that so far it does look good for McCarthy, because the fact that Chip Roy and people in the Freedom Caucus are saying we're at our bare minimum, that may seem not good, but it actually is pretty good for Kevin McCarthy at this point, because that was not easy to do. And it seems like they're making these arguments in good faith when they are taking them to the media, and that is positive for him. Bodes well for today. He probably just wants to get a quick vote, get it over with, but that could go in a million different directions.
So how would you handicap it? Do you think that he will do you think he'll put it on the floor today and have enough votes to get it passed?
If I had to bet, I would say it goes on the floor today or right after, and it does get the votes, but I wouldn't put a lot of money on that.
And then if it gets pulled, do you think he comes back by the end of the week with enough votes, or do you think he just kind of retrenches and continues the game of chicken that I feel like he has to lose in order for this to wrap up?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a really good question because we saw he went through how many ballots and kept getting concessions and concessions in the speaker race, and maybe there's some muscle memory there. Matt Gaetz knows that he can keep going through, putting Kevin McCarthy through the ringer time and again, and finally get to a better place, despite all odds. Maybe because they really don't have a backup, but it's possible that also blows up in everyone's face, and there are relationships broken that can never be repaired. So I think that's like the worst case scenario, probably.
And yeah, the Freedom Caucus just seems structurally and fundamentally in the same handicap as kind of the Progressive Caucus, which is that they have some leverage because they have some members of Congress. They want a much different governing structure than exists, but they don't have a majority to enact that.
But the Republicans in general have such a slim majority that they have all the power in the Freedom Caucus's court. Or the same thing with like the Tuesday group, and we saw this in the Pelosi Congress with Justice Democrats. They really did wield a lot of power, and I think a lot of people on the left would be correct to say they didn't always wield it appropriately or as much as they could. But the Freedom Caucus has less, I think, reservations about doing that because they already don't have the media, so they can afford to blow things up because they're not losing media credibility. They never had it.
They still have the problem that they don't have the votes. But we'll see. We'll see if they can outmaneuver that handicap.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Sagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.